Welcome to another Let's Talk episode of Tech in the Arts, the podcast series on the Arts Management and Technology Laboratory. We'll be continuing our conversation with Dorothy Santos today. The goal of our Let's Talk series is to exchange ideas, bring awareness, and stay on top of the trends. My name is Samantha Sonnet, and I'm the Social Media and Marketing Coordinator for AMT Lab. And today, I am joined again by Dorothy Santos.
I saw on your bio that you're the author of Materiality to Machines, Manufacturing the Organic and Hypotheses for Future Imaginings, and a million other things that you've done and accomplished as well. But this really stuck out to me in particular. I was wondering if you could maybe talk a little bit about your process and what it is for those listening that don't know.
My process of writing?
That piece in particular.
Yeah, I was asked by Meredith Trumbull, who I need to get back to because she's been amazing in terms of the writing side of my life. She asked me to be a part of this anthology on, bioart. And so I ended up looking at Heather Dewey Hagborg's work, Laura Splain, Tur Van Balen, and Revital Cohen, and writing about their works. And the reason why I wrote specifically about their works was because they each took very different ideas around biology and science, even though Cohen and Van Balen, and rightfully so, they don't necessarily, I don't know if they still feel this way, but they don't necessarily associate as artists who make bio art. And I respect that. It's art. But the process of selecting, these artists had a lot to do with the fact that they were subverting biometrics and biosurveillance in a way that I thought was really fascinating. I think with Van Balen and Cohen, I think for me, I was more concerned with the fact that I was fascinated by the fact that they took old ventilator, like vintage hospital equipment that has kind of migrated around the world and then recreated a life support system by connecting all of those systems together, which I think is, to me, that's analogous to just the way the world works, especially in different, parts of the world where you have to makeshift everything. Mm-hmm. And you make a system work because it is about life or death. And so you do the best with what you've got. And with Heather and looking at Stranger Visions, I think for me, the process of writing about it or what it entailed was me thinking multisensorially about her walking through the streets of Brooklyn, collecting people's detritus. So gum, cigarette butts, fingernail clippings. That's what a scientist does. You're not just creating some kind of taxonomy. You're very curious about how humanity lives and is present in the world. I think with Laura Splain's sculptures, creating these kind of forms and 3D printing kind of how someone's facial expressions produce a kind of metric, a visual metric, was something that equally fascinated me. But I think sometimes when I write about artwork I haven't seen or experienced personally, that's when I have to really fully immerse myself in the documentation, which is a little bit, it's different and it's difficult because of course my preference is to experience the artwork itself. But and thank you for asking, because I have actually never been asked about that article.
Really?
Yeah, I think you're the first person that's actually asked me about it.
That was the first one that caught my eye on your website, honestly.
Oh, okay.
I was looking at different projects that you had done and just reading like very briefly about each of them, because again, you've done so much, which is so impressive to me. Everything that you've been able to accomplish. And you told me something super interesting before we started recording about you being a tarot reader and incorporating that into your work with your other collaborators. So please talk more about that, because I'm just like amazed at that still.
Yeah, so Anna, Xiaomina, Xiaowei Wang, and myself, we do have a media project. So we do have a podcast, and we also teach classes and our practice is mostly focused on writers and artists and working with them. But yeah, I've been reading tarot since I was a teenager. So that's a little over 20 years now. But professionally, I've been reading since, it kind of was kismet. I really started reading professionally. So for, at events or taking on different clients. So people that weren't family and friends about 6-7 years ago. And, Anna, Xiaowei, and I respectively are in different parts of tech, and the way that we see the world oftentimes is informed by how we slow down. And tarot is a practice, at least I'll speak for myself, it definitely slows me down. Okay. I love the analog form of it. I love that originally it was a game that, oh my gosh, I forgot. Benbow was the last name, but he created the Visconti Sforza deck, I think in the 15th century. But it was, he was an artist, and some affluent Italian family asked him to create a deck of mostly trumps, unfortunately. That's the name of it. But essentially the major arcana, so these different types of archetypes. But over the years, having studied the 78 cards, and I just got to give mad love and respect to Rachel Pollack, who just recently passed away, who wrote the book 78 Degrees of Wisdom. And that's always been like one of my tarot Bibles. She's always been so on the forefront of not just writing science fiction and, fantastical worlds and ritual, but definitely guiding this whole new generation now of tarot readers. And I think that's what people oftentimes forget too. Tarot, it could be daunting because it's 78 cards, and people are like, well, how do you even create a whole lexicon around that? But one of the things I've mentioned is, a tarot reader is it's kind of I'm speaking for myself. I'm not speaking for anyone else when I say this, but I understand my own learning of tarot a lot like the way that you might feed an AI. It's going to learn it over time. It's never going to perfect it. And you're going to have your own experiences with it. I'm not saying I'm not artificial intelligence, but it's kind of the closest thing that I can grab onto to kind of tell someone, well, you just keep practicing it. But the relationship in regard to technology and how we've used it to inform, our understanding of the world was kind of best represented when we did this one project for Unfinished, which is a conference out of New York. I think it's Unfinished Live. We did the conference last year for 2022. And we were asked to, come up with a workshop, and, Xiaowei had spoken previously at Unfinished about their research and academic work and creative practice and writing practice. And Xiaowei was gracious enough to invite me and Anna, and we did a tarot workshop with a bunch of technologists. Okay. And
was that well received?
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I'm just going to say this, that I think Anna, Xiaowei, and I were pleasantly surprised. Yeah. But the one thing that I noticed about everyone that attended the workshop is I think that they would identify themselves as the artists, the queer folks, the QT BIPOC folks, that's exactly who we want to be in conversation and in community with, and curious folks, people who maybe have never understood tarot but wanted to understand it through a different lens. And so we actually had we did a reading for a technology. The audience chose the DAO, or what is it? Distributed autonomous, or I don't even, gosh, people, yeah, and I'm in open source too, but like hopefully you can look that up and correct that, but because it's slipping my mind what the acronym stands for. Yeah, the audience chose a particular technology because we had a whole list on the screen of one of our presentation slides, and everyone said, oh, do the DAO. And then we did that, and kind of giving a reading of and it's not fortune telling. I feel like I think a lot of people read tarot as it is a divination practice, but it's not predictive analytics. It's a way to have a conversation. And I think it really depends on the people involved and, your willingness to be open and receive it. I think something else that was learned through the workshop is when you get a whole bunch of technologists together and ask them create a deck. So every person at the work, we asked every person, but we got an outpouring. It was like 100 cards, but almost everyone created a card. We said, hey, why don't you create your own? And then we'll create one giant deck. And then we will read using this collective deck for a few of you. And to see kind of the magic unfold, that's magic to me. To read from a deck you've never seen before, and then to riff off of one another and be in conversation. And people created archetypes like the clone. Someone created the archetype of the shadow ban. So a lot of it was driven from already existing kind of conversations around how we engage with different types of technologies and digital technology, specifically like social media platforms, AI, issues of privacy, our devices, smart technologies, etc. So yeah.
I think it's really cool how you were able to like bridge that gap between, you talk a lot about enjoying the analog aspect of a lot of things that you have encountered in your past and even today, with the board games that you played in your childhood to the tarot cards that you're using today to do the readings, but you're also incorporating different types of modern day technology into your conversations. So I think I'm interested to know where you see emerging technologies playing out in the arts in the next 5 to 10 years. If you do at all, do you think it's going to be beneficial, or do you think maybe more of the analog aspect will be beneficial for artists in the future?
I mean, it's hard to say. I always feel when I'm asked future leaning questions, it's this, and don't worry, I don't see it as a trick question by any means. I'm answering as honestly as possible here, but I think the reason why it scares me to even answer is because I don't want to be perceived as someone who, I don't even like being called an art critic. People have called me that. I've never liked to be called a critic because it's predicated on this understanding that I might be a tastemaker. I'm not. I'm a writer. I am an artist. A scholar, I guess, I shouldn't say I guess. I know if my partner I know when my partner listens to this, he was like, why do you keep saying that? Just own it. But I say this too because when I think about the future, it's hard for me to think of the future without being hyper present, which I think people are oftentimes have a lot of trouble with. We live in a world that's increasingly fatalistic, where we feel that we'll be figured out in an instant because of the giant walking data sets that we are. But I also feel that, how do you not fall too far deep into isolation? Or, in the tarot, there's the hermit, you can, that there's a wisdom in solitude and there's a wisdom obviously in the analog, but how do you also co-evolve alongside other people? And how do you be in conversation around how technology can hurt or hinder us and harm us? Because, hurt and harm, they're different. They're related though. So, thinking about 5 to 10 years in the future, if anything, I also want to be mindful of the technologies that, that help us. And I would want people to increasingly understand that technology is to supplement. It's never the thing that ought to dictate what we do and how we live. And I think this is another reason why a big part of my practice as a media scholar is critiquing media. So, I've watched untold times Apple commercials where the Apple Watch is, thank God I had my Apple Watch or I would have not been rescued from this, fall in the forest. It's just, that's a very dystopian way of thinking and living. Also, it's not an object such as a watch can mediate an experience or help you get the help you need. But more often than not, it's a human on the other line, or it's a human that will be the one to help. And I want people to remember that I don't want to live in this kind of dystopian future where we're relying so heavily on our smart devices and not one another. So it's a mix of, you know, analog and digital, but also understanding that there are systems such as mutual aid networks, which is, in indigenous Filipino culture and, and indigenous, cultures here in the United States, like they've been doing mutual aid. That's not anything new. Those are technologies in and of themselves, and just because they don't have zeros and ones behind them doesn't mean they're not a technology. So that's another thing I hope that people understand.
I just like have so many things that I'd like love to ask, but I think what is most interesting to you that you're working on now that you would like to share with everybody?
I am working on the cyborg's prosody, which was generously funded, and I almost didn't apply to the Mozilla Creative Media Award because I thought that's such a long shot. Why would they even give that to me? But
You won.
I
You
was
did.
one of the 2022 cohort members, and this sounds so cheesy and possibly like so sweet and saccharine, but it really changed my artistic practice to understand how building a team of collaborators to kind of really see out a vision works. And so for those that are like, what's cyborg's prosody? So prosody, also just to kind of define really quickly, is everyone has prosody. It's the tone, it's the animation of your voice, it's the intonation, things of that nature. We all have it. But the cyborg's prosody as an art project is a voice-based interactive docu-poetics piece, because it is 5 levels. It's a game. I'm calling it a game. It is a game to me. But it is going to be on the web for free, accessible. Originally, I wanted to make it as an app, but after conversations with different mentors and advisors, they told me to stray away from that. Also, in hindsight, it's good that happened, because I don't want people to see it as something that's akin to a commodity, because apps, even in themselves, even if they're $1.99, you're still paying for an app to use and to engage, But I think one of the things that really made the project kind of come to life and really personal, because originally a cyborg's prosody was meant to be a response to accent reduction schools that have emerged in the past couple decades, but more predominantly in the Philippines, also in India. And I wanted to create kind of an accent induction school. But that's nothing new, but even though, there's Duolingo, there's Memrise, there's Babbel, all of the Rosetta Stone, those aren't necessarily inducing an accent, but you're learning a language. Mm-hmm. And so that's the reason why I wanted to do a project that really paid homage to my mom's immigration story in a way that was poetic. But the 5 levels are based on Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's stages of grief. So, anger or denial, anger, bargaining, etc. And I interviewed my mom pretty intensely on each of these stages, but through the lens of language. So the diminishing of mother tongue somehow. My mom still speaks Tagalog, but she spent more of her adult life in the U.S. and and she's an American citizen. She became an American citizen years ago, but realizing how she had to suppress her own accent and what that meant, and also what it meant to be a child of the diaspora. And I didn't even know that there was a name for this, but in linguistics, I didn't realize that growing up I was a child language broker. What that means is I'm translating emails for my mom. I'm writing emails. I'm telling her things to say. And even though my mom understood English, it's just, it was always just easier for me to, well, you could just say it, just tell them, or, could you tell me, could you look at this thing? Am I saying this right? Da, da, da. And there's a kind of psychosocial aspect of what that does to not just a child. And I don't blame my mom, but I feel like what I want a lot of people to understand is that when you are a child of immigrant parents or an immigrant family, you have to do that for your family. So not only are your own identities unfolding, you have a it's like you have a whole ass job as someone that is translating the world for your family, and what that meant for me. And also having a lot of guilt and shame trying to correct my mom over these years when I should have just been honoring her speech, her accent, her prosody. But the game became very personal in that sense, and the object of the game, so people are probably wondering like, okay, I get it, but what's the object of the game? So in these 5 levels, you have to, it starts with level 1 that's all in English, and it ends with a vignette that's all in Tagalog. So increasingly there's Tagalog words that become interspersed, and words and phrases and sentences that you have to say along the way, and you have to mimic the cyborg. The cyborg's my mom.
Okay.
So there's this kind of tension that, you know, you're mimicking my mom. And some people, some of the more controversial, I guess, opinions about my project, that in conversation with people is like, I've had someone tell me that the project is like, well, that sounds racist, or that's culturally appropriative. And I said, well, how did you learn language? And usually people will shut up because they'll be like, oh, dang, that's right. You learn language through mimicry. And I want people, and I think what is more, important for me is that people understand I'm not trying to create a language learning app. Duolingo already did that.
Right.
They were very kind to me. I was a visiting scholar there this past week. It was really amazing. Talking about linguistics and computational linguistics with them was really cool. But I want people to know that sometimes the best ways to learn things about other cultures, other people, and these stories is not always through the shiny and sleek. It's through the rough and the crude and all of the hurdles and obstacles, and a lot of that you can kind of do through poetry, but especially a documentary poetics or docu-poetics, which is what the form of the game really is.
That's awesome. I'm looking forward to seeing that when you're finished.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you for coming to talk to me today. I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. And before we leave, do you want to give like a shout out to any of your socials, your website for people listening?
Yeah, and it's just dorothysantos.com.
Okay. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Tech in the Arts. Be on the lookout for new episodes coming to you very soon. If you found this episode informative, educational, or inspirational, be sure to send this to another arts or technology aficionado in your life. You can let us know what you think of this podcast by visiting our website, amtlab.org, or you can email us at amtlabcmu@gmail.com. You can follow us on Instagram at Tech in the Arts or Facebook and LinkedIn at Arts Management and Technology Lab. We'll see you next time.